regarding the budget support, of course, this MIP enables us to use budget support modality in the future. But as you know, budget support always has also a lot of conditions, and the first condition, of course, is that there is IMF program which is adopted for Ethiopia. And this is something we discussed earlier today with the Finance Minister Shide, that also from the EU's perspective, it's very important that the government of Ethiopia is able to conclude the negotiations with the IMF, and there will be an IMF program for Ethiopia. So this is something we highly support, and of course we are also at disposal if the government somehow needs our support for the negotiations. But this is the first step. Then, of course, there are also political conditions, and that's why I also wanted to highlight the role of the political dialogue and policy dialogue with the government, because always when we use budget support, there are also very clear political conditions. So there are economic conditions, but also political conditions. So I would say that now, while we were able to adopt this MIP, multi-annual indicative program for Ethiopia, it is in a way the first step of normalization of our cooperation, and it enables us to use budget support modality, but not at this stage. So then we are moving forward, and let's see when then there is this stage when we can then go back to the budget support. From the beginning, it has been very clear that the European Union is committed to support the reform agenda of the Prime Minister Abiy's government. So we are very much supporting his reforms in terms of economy, but also in terms of general reforms of society. So through these political or policy dialogue, we of course want to set a common objectives and targets for our bilateral cooperation, and for us it's also important that through this dialogue we are able to monitor and assess how those reforms and objectives and targets are also fulfilled or reached. And this is precisely the idea of the budget support. Budget support is a modality which goes to a bank account of the finance ministry. It's the European Union taxpayers' money. So of course, from that perspective, it's also important that there is accountability, because when we are operating with taxpayers' money, it's important to be able to showcase also the results which we have received and achieved through these different programs. But I think Finance Minister Shide is very well aware of these different conditions, being also finance minister. Myself, I'm a former finance minister. So I think now this adoption of the MIP allows us also to continue discussing between the government and of course also the EU delegation and the member states here in Addis Ababa, so that then whenever the IMF program is adopted, then we can start to discuss also the political conditions for the budget support.
As well as its member states are very important. We had long established strategic partnerships, particularly EU as a representative of all European countries has been a strategic partner for Ethiopia, supporting Ethiopia's economic development and economic reform. As Urpilainen has already mentioned it, EU has been supporting Ethiopia's reform effort. That process has been slowed down because of the impact on our relationship. Now, signing of MIP will enable us to move back into a normal development partnerships. We are going to use different instruments as part of MIP to implement the resource envelope with multi-year period, to use various multi-donor programs, which is very important. EU has been always a very important partner when it comes to national big multi-donor supported development programs, which is very vital for social development, for safety net, for infrastructure development, and for climate issues as well. Therefore, signing of today will enable Ethiopia to get much strengthened support from EU and its member states in pursuing its development activities. It's also coincide with homegrown economic reform too, which has been launched a few months ago. So within that context also the priority areas which has been agreed on Green Deal, human development and governance and peace building are all important. The envelope is also very important, 650 million euro. And as in terms of any single year commitment, it is even bigger than the previous one. Therefore, we will have more financing available for the development programs in the country. In fact, as Ethiopia is the most populous country in the region, has huge demand, and we would like to ask the Commissioner, we need to have more resources. And as Europe Global Gateway Initiative as well, leveraging EU's resources to de-risk private investment from EU into Ethiopia is also part of this process, and that also additionally complement, in addition to what we do as official development partnerships, the private sector angle, which is going to be supported by this initiative, is going to be very much instrumental. Ethiopia is committed to addressing the macro imbalance and the bottlenecks for private sector development, therefore encouraging EU private investment into Ethiopia with further leverage massively the capacity of Europe. And Europe is a major source of investment for Ethiopia. It's a major market. Therefore, this strategic partnership is now back on track and will deliver more to the demand of the people of Ethiopia for Ethiopia's reform, peace building, and cohesive society formation in Ethiopia.
First of all, I think it's important to underline that we never stopped funding the population of Ethiopia. So through special measures, through different agencies, UN agencies, but also NGOs, local authorities, we have been supporting the citizens of Ethiopia all the time.
Multi-donor programs.
Indeed. So we have been supporting food security as well as health and education services. So this has been a priority for us to support the population of Ethiopia. But indeed, now through this multi-annual indicative program, this MIP, we can start to cooperate again more, I would say, strategically and closely with the government authorities, including, of course, with the finance ministry. And in addition to this 650 million euros MIP, which was adopted today or signed today, we also provide support through our member states as well as through the private sector. So we discussed heavily earlier today with the finance minister, but I also discussed with the Prime Minister Abiy just before this meeting that we are very committed to encourage and attract European companies to invest in Ethiopia. And we have a global gateway strategy. Minister was referring to that, through which we are also leveraging private investments in terms of green transition, but also digital transition in Ethiopia. So this 650 million euros public funding is part of our cooperation with Ethiopia, but not all, because we are also contributing through our member states, through so-called Team Europe, as well as also regional programs and through the private sector.